Hello, everyone. Okay, we're mic'd up. That's a loud microphone. But then I've got this much space to play with. It's fantastic. Welcome to this panel, which has been organised as a collaboration with New Nordic Films and Europa Distribution. Have been partners now for some years, going back to 2015. And it's a partnership that I know is hugely appreciated by both sides, but distributors have found this a place that I think touches on the discussion today, a place where a lot of new ideas, a lot of new talent and great film has emerged over the last few years. Just quickly, just one little thing on the panel. We did have more people who are going to be here, so it's coincidence that the women on the panel, unfortunately, were the ones, coincidentally, who were COVID affected, so we don't do all-male panels normally, but I'm sure, just for nostalgia reasons, you will enjoy this trip back into history. It was always like this once, but thank the Lord for progress. So the title of this panel is kind of how can Nordic films reach an international audience? The question, obviously, straight away as well. How are we going to stop? Nordic films are reaching international audiences on really quite extraordinary levels. I think it's sometimes easy to forget that you've got half the population of the UK for all of those countries put together, and this is a region that's got a genre named after it. That's already pretty cool. But actually, it seems like a whole load of new genres and new approaches are coming in. I was talking this morning to a friend of mine who's not a film fan at all, but is utterly obsessed by Norwegian disaster movies, which apparently are a genre all in themselves, and made, I'm told, at the price of about 3 PCR tests in Norway, judging by my experience this morning. So, or a round of beer. But it's extraordinary the way that it's progressed. And looking at Norway, I remember being the editor of Screen International in the early 2000s when there was one film coming out of Norway, and there was a discussion of where that would come. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, we're seeing enormous rises. And those rises are, as I think any look at the hit European films in Europe and around the world will show, these are successful films. This is an area where, just for a change, I'm not going to get to do the full misery, which we like to do on panels about film. The disaster, where's it all going to end? This seems to me a region that has got a lot to be excited about. And the question perhaps should be better put, which is, how can Nordic films continue to build those international audiences? And how can you ensure that we're not talking here about waves, but we're talking about sustainable reach around the world for films? And that will be the discussion that we're going to have today. So we have a distinguished panel of people who are going to be right at the heart of that discussion. So at the end there, we have from Portugal, João Paulo Abreu, who's the MD of Films for You.
Hello, thank you.
There's a hello. You could have said that in Portuguese. I think that would have been...
Olá, obrigado por estar aqui.
There we go. We've just to show how diverse we are. And Peter Ahlén from Reinvent, one of those, I guess, Reinvent companies in lots of ways. You've got the... from Denmark, it's kind of packaging and financing and sales, but you're the kind of head honcho in the sales department. So a hello from
hello.
And then we have Marcin Luczaj from Poland, New Europa Stills in Poland. Again, I think someone who's already got significant experience, I think, in terms of sales. I don't know how you describe yourself, a guru of sales in some way at your company. I'm sure you have a title.
No, we always say we aspire to be Nordic.
but we're not, because we have so many Nordic films.
We should make that into a badge. We want to be Nordic. That's because we're nearly Nordic. You had a good go at conquering the UK. I wish you'd done a better job. We'd still be in Europe. So we have we have Poland, and then finally we have just a little bit further up. We have Hans Kok. And again, Arti Film, I think you a distinguished sales agent, someone with long experience, I think, in terms of dealing with Nordic film as we were here.
Distribution.
Distribution, sorry. Yeah, what did I say?
Sales.
Oh, so easy. You'd think there'd be a clue somewhere in the title of the organisation that was doing it. So yes, distribution. Apologies, and that is the core discussion. Let's start with you, Peter, as you are someone who is from this kind of area. Give us, we have talked about here in quite positive terms about the way things developed. Just give us your perspective in terms of sales. I'm allowed to say sales with you. Give us in just why. What are the kind of elements that have made up this this kind of trend towards Nordic film?
I think it's a lot of different things. I think in the Nordic region we have a long tradition for filmmaking and storytelling, and we have had these waves, as you talk about, with the we have the classic films and then the dogma wave, which really put us on the map, I think one thing, which it's of course always the story, and that is the core in all filmmaking, and I think we're good at finding that local story with a very universal theme, which is relatable. I also think that right now, what we see in the past years, especially in the Nordic region, has been there's been a big opening for new talent and young people, which I'm not sure we see in such way in other countries. I think we might be a bit bold when creating new content and cherry picking the new young talents from the different film schools and giving them opportunities, and not too contained, but also they get the chance to really explore the storytelling and the cinematic scene in all sorts of genres, in disaster films and small art house films, and I think that's a key thing right now, that we are very open to the new generation and giving them a chance and hope, and we should, because they need to take over, and they are.
I mean, there's two or three things in there. I mean, one is you look at all of those Nordic countries. There are great auteurs from each of those countries, but it seems like it's less auteur-driven, the Nordic trend, than others. Those auteurs are still very big, of course, but it still feels like there's less dependence on just a small number of the big names to hold together the whole of the whole region.
Well, definitely, and we of course still have those auteurs and which has been making all the big Danish films and Norwegian and Swedish films for the past 10, 15, 20 years. But it's right. I think there's a shift right now, and yeah.
Do you think that there's the cooperation between the Nordic countries is now much more systematic? I mean, whilst there is, we talk about Nordic, it is a lot of distinct countries as well. I mean, there's big differences between Denmark and Iceland, but is there a sense of cooperation and common purpose within the Nordic region?
I think that like every country in the Nordic region has their own stories to tell, which is important. I think one common thing which has made the success of Nordic film is, of course, also the language, or maybe not the success, but the accessibility. People outside of the Nordic region has gotten used to hearing our language. We all know how it is sometimes to be presented for a new film in a language we have never heard before. It can be a bit distracted. Right now, with all the streamers, it's being more and more common. But since we have such a long story of storytelling, and also with all our TV series, people have for many years now gotten used to listen to especially Danish and Swedish and Norwegian, and I think also Icelandic now with when the Trapped came, that opened the whole world for Iceland. Finland as well has really been put on the map, I think, the last couple of years, and it's a language I don't think I'll ever understand it, but I'm also getting more used to listening to it.
Yeah, there's probably also an argument through the streamers that dubbing has got considerably more successful, and certainly from English, from most of those Finnish obviously has a very distinct language, but a lot of those Scandinavian languages actually are very successfully dubbed into English, I think. So maybe there's an element of that in there as well. I just want to touch on the last thing that you mentioned. So, the storytelling tradition we understand. You can talk about storytelling in the in Nordic regions. We could be going back thousands of years, and I wouldn't expect you to talk us through all those thousands of years. But I think a lot of the discussion in countries is really, you talk about the development of young people, and I think we can throw in there the notion of diversity too, which is it's talent that isn't being forced into a very narrow kind of way of looking at it. And, some film institutes can be quite Stalinist, I think, in the way that what they're trying to do is to get everyone to think the same way. But from your understanding or the way you're expressing it, there is a trend coming through towards just allowing a bit more freedom for these younger people. Maybe give us a bit more idea how that's happening.
But definitely, I think there's so many new, strong voices which needs to be heard, and which luckily gets the chance to be heard, and that has come with also some of the streamers, but also all these short format series being produced in I think it was probably Skam which opened that ball. And that has really been a platform or a launch pad for a lot of newcomers to the industry who has been able to express themselves and with these new strong voices in a way which was affordable for the channels and the streamers, and they were, because of that, ready to take that risk, and I think it paid off, and that has made it opened a lot of possibility for new talent, I think, and maybe also given never mind.
Okay, that expresses it perfectly. I think that look, we'll move on. So you've given us a picture of a dynamic, diverse region where people are acting within their individual countries, but there's a general feeling that there is something happening always in the Nordic regions. We're not now just talking about the Nordic noirs, we're talking about a whole load of new things coming through. Fantastic. The question really here for distributors is, really about how that then plays out, because there is a sense, I think, and we'll come to you first on this, Hans, that there is a feeling that there is something specific about Nordics that is recognised by audiences, and that makes it attractive, I think, in terms of distribution. So maybe you could give us your perspective as someone who's distributing this kind of work from and I think you've got something to show us in terms of...
Yes, I think that when we look at Nordic movies in the past 30, 40 years, it used to be the Nordics were famous for child and for kids, and they were always successful in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and that was what Nordic films were in the Netherlands. Then there was gradually a change with the dogma. That was the first wave when non-youth films were getting popular. And then a third wave, let me call it like that, started, I think, almost 20 years ago, when there was an enormous interest in books. I see a parallel with the popularity of the novels, the crime stories from the Nordics. Not like the literature from 70s, 80s, but like the Millennium, which was launched, I think, 20 years ago. That was a huge success in my country. And then people started to realize, oh, for crime and for good written crime, we don't need only the American or the British novels. We can also read the novels from the Nordics, because they are really clever, and the situation was situated in the north in wintertime. It has this specific sphere which we recognize as a European, the houses, and apart from America is so different in their city building than Europe. So, to my opinion, like after the dogma was in the 90s, we got the third wave, which started to getting popular, together with what Peter says about the language. Normally, the films in the Netherlands were very much English dominated, of course French, and then you had German and Spanish. The four main languages in the world. But then it started to gradually that Danish and Swedish, okay, that's not horrible to listen to. Don't forget me. I don't want to offend, but it is. It was, and gradually, when you hear that many and more times, then you get used to it, and then you get the TV series like the Wallander, like the Killing, like the Bridge and Borgen, and all these series were enormous popular. So the people in the theaters were getting warm for content from the Nordics. I have a slide here with a figure. Then you can see the movement from the percentage in the market share. But let me tell you this first. We have around annually 35 million admissions in the Netherlands. But 80% of the 35 million is mainstream driven. So that's still American, the Hollywood studio. So the 20% is art house cinema. So the share of Nordics is really small, but it is compared to the 35 million. So I start with 2012. Then there were seven Nordic films were released in cinema. So this is not TV, this is theatrical. By the way, the best scoring film was Love Is All You Need, a Danish movie with Pierre Brosnan. But then you see a few years later, you see almost that the market share is doubled. Also more films are released. The Square, of course, a Swedish movie, was the best film in 2017. The Guilty in 2018, and in 2019 it was a Cats movie, and Queen of Hearts, a Danish movie. What you see is, for example, Queen of Hearts, to my opinion, that is a drama which is made in Denmark about a very delicate subject, about an adult woman who is sleeping with a minor, the friend of her son, which is a very delicate subject. aspect, which is also running now in society. But to my opinion, how this film is made, how sensitive and how delicate the subject is treated, that's the way why Nordic films are successful. It is done with care, with a lot of emotion in it. It's not ordinary. It's not how do you say blunt or and that's what I recognize in a lot of Nordic films. Either it's a drama or a comedy or a thriller. It's done with care. The content is really it's a high quality cast. So we grow from, to my opinion, like the Nordics producing like movies and TV series for kids, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the production grew to adult movies. You have the large production of the books with a crime theme. When I look at this is a library, when I go into a library in my city and I go to the section of the crime or the detectives, I see a lot of Nordic names. I immediately know, that is somebody from Sweden or from Finland or from Norway or from Denmark. And I'm always more interested because I know its quality. It's good to read. So that is a driver for the success for the films too. The TV series which I mentioned, which are really popular. And of course, what Peter says, the growing production. It is also, I think, in a country which is stimulating producing of TV and film. Okay, then you get a higher production. So in the Netherlands, audience is more into Nordics because of its growing popularity and the language. We always subtitle, by the way, so we hear the speaking. We don't dub. Only the film for kids from 4 or 5 years, of course. So we are getting used to the Nordic languages. And me as a distributor, we have done in the past several Nordic movies. We bought them because the risk is lesser. It's not like the language people don't want to see in the cinema. Like we have done a couple of years ago some movies from Bulgaria or from Romania. Which were really good, but I noticed still a barrier for the audience to go to these movies because of maybe the language, maybe I cannot explain it either. But for Norwegian and Swedish, Danish, that's finished. Our most successful Nordic releases was a few years ago Out of Nature, Mot Naturen, a Norwegian movie. Heartstone from Iceland was a big success for us. Last year, Barn, Beware of Children, a Barn, Norwegian movie, very high quality with very much interest also for schools. And we're doing, in November, we release a Danish movie, Persona non grata, which is released in July in Denmark. It's more lighter movie, but also a movie which brings like the subject of the countryside and the city life, which every country itself also recognizes the distinction and how people judge each other on this theme. So for me, we are already convinced, and we are always looking for good content from the Nordics.
Yeah, there's a couple of really big things come out. One is it's not just about language, is it? We're talking about cultural familiarity. We've got used to watching certain types of things, and it is books, and it is music, and it is film, and it's not just one thing. So your audience will already feel a sense of being at home in terms of Nordic content, maybe more than they would with some other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. The other thing I think is interesting, and I wonder whether it can be put as clearly as this. I was looking at the Danish films during the pandemic, and obviously it was a peculiar situation, but getting more than 50% of market share is still a truly extraordinary performance, even then. But looking at it, it feels to me like part of the trick that you're talking about is it's like the intelligent mainstream. It seems to me sometimes Europe has gone you're either hardcore over here or it's American blockbusters over here. But it feels like through the TV and the crime and the rest of it, there's a kind of sense of that they've captured an element of mainstream culture, but without really it being compromised in terms of intelligent storytelling. Do you think that would be fair from your point of view?
Yeah, well, like I said, when we look at a movie or a series from America, it is always more different because it's not our society. The city building is different.
Yeah.
The way people live is different. The shopping areas are different. So what is recognizable within the Nordics, it is more like it's the same as us. Of course, the architecture is different, but the city life is the same as we know. So it is recognizable for us. And then when the quality is good, the story is the telling of the story is good, then it can have a success.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's move to Portugal with João. So you I guess Europe, at least at the other end of Europe, so perhaps less of that commonality in terms of culture. But tell us about the Nordic experience there and your sense of the market.
Well, Portugal is a 10 million people country. Our cinemas experience are quite driven to popcorn and blockbusters, and unfortunately is as it is. The Nordic films traditional were played in art house circuits during many years, and they are always recognized as good movies, good directors, good stories, and there was a share of cinema goers that want to see this type of films. I think most of us here are professionals, and you know that we have the potential cinema goer, we have the cinemas, we have the distributors, and we have producers and sales agents. This has to be seen all together. What I want to say is that there was and there is potential for Nordic films in Portugal, but first there is a need for the distribution to take the risk to import and to license the films. The second barrier that we need to cross is that we have to convince the bookers from the cinemas to play the films. And if all this, with all this pass, the films will become available for the audiences. We start in 2015 with the first Norwegian disaster movie, Bolgen, The Wave. We did quite well. Then we did the second one, we did the third one, and we have building these audiences, and we have also establish close relationship with some difficult bookers that are used to book American films, English spoken, and when they saw a Nordic disaster movie, they even care. They don't want to come and to see the movie, so they were quite reluctant. But we try, and this is, I think, a work that has to be done in the long term. You cannot expect results in the short term. But we did that. Then we released Guilty. We released in last April Drunk, another round, and these films went quite successful. I think that also during the lockdown and in the last these 2 years, the fact that the people are at home, and in Portugal we have a very high numbers of subscribers on Netflix and the HBO, and the word of mouth of the Nordic productions is so good that people start to talk and people start to see a Nordic series, which is quite positive, and we in cinema will benefit from that.
It's interesting because we tend to be very negative about the impact of VOD platforms in terms of cinema, but the story you're telling there I think is very significant, which is it's exposed a lot of people to work that perhaps they wouldn't know. And there is a kind of star system even. I'm sure there's only 20 actors in the whole of Scandinavia, because every time I'm watching a film, I'm what were they in? And then you go rushing back. But there is that sense of that the TV, the series has kind of begun to build up familiarity, which are bookers beginning to get this in their head? Are they beginning to start thinking, okay, I now know what you're talking about? Is that what's happening? Are they now understanding?
Yes.
Yeah.
The reaction is quite positive. I think the growth of the streaming platforms in the last 2 years is due to the fact that people cannot go to the cinemas, and even the cinemas are open. There was a lack of product because the distributor don't want to take risks and release films. So they took the opportunity and they jump, and the audiences are there. But I think in the long term, the relation between the cinemas distributor and platforms is positive, because they are also helping to bring audiences to the cinema. Because a good film, is something to be seen in the big screen. You can see a film at home, but it's not cinema. Cinema has to be seen in the big screen. And that's the message that we are trying to pass, and I hope we can cooperate together with streaming platforms.
And do you feel, I mean, one of the concerns, I think, for a lot of people about the growth of streaming, and obviously the Nordic region is perhaps the home. I mean, this is where streaming has reached its highest level. Do you still feel there's a lot of cinematic work coming out? Because the concern was always that we would end up with people who were great for TV but didn't understand the scale of cinema. But is that reflected in any way with you, or are you still seeing great cinematic work?
I believe in cinema, and I believe in the future of the cinema.
I have
no doubts about that.
Okay. Let's move to Marcin. So, again, I guess you're across and down. So, from a Polish perspective, I mean, tell me about your experience and your feeling about Nordic films in terms of distribution in your country.
I mean, Nordic films are super popular in Poland, and it's mainly, I think there is a lot of factors. Like, first was the music it's not only about AHA and ABBA, but it's also like the whole electronic scene and the Icelandic scene and the Swedish electronic music that became like a mainstream in the clubs, in the cities. That was the thing. Then the books, as Hans mentioned, and a lot of stuff. And I think one of our first hits was Rams, the Icelandic film, which was like a huge hit in Poland, like about two old guys and the sheep in the middle of nowhere. And it became a film that, my mom was going and her friends were going, and they were like, and major televisions were buying this, which wasn't really the case before, of this tiny art house film of the director that no one heard, no one have seen these actors, and and this kind of a light, I would say like an ironic, subtle social tales that I think the Nordics are really good at. They became a brand itself, and for us as sellers, they also build a trust within distributors, that the distributors, I think if we would go for the same script set in Serbia or Romania, and you go in Sweden and Denmark, I think everyone has a slightly different picture of it, how it will look. And it's also like, I think a lot of, like, for instance, Icelandic films are suffering that I don't think you can name one urban drama from Iceland. Everyone's like rural, mountains, sheep, and all the stuff, but it's, except like one Reykjavik, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like this. And this is, I think, it's also, because we did like one called Under the Tree, and I remember a lot of distributors were also like, oh, it's set in a city. They have a city. It's like, yeah. And it's, it's been very, because this is what we are used to. And it's same, come to Sweden or Denmark, I remember like when I was watching with friends who had nothing to do with the film, about the killing, like for instance, we were watching together, they were like, it looks like really from a proper noir, from like, Los Angeles at night, like the Copenhagen portrait this way, they've never been there. And I think this is like, it's sort of like a national branding that I think here it's very much explored. And since I think there is a lot of flirt with genres, it's become more accessible, that even, I think there is still a big number of like social dramas being produced here that we never get to see, that they just stay locally. That they tackle like very local topics, and I don't think the Nordics are exporting it. But it's one of the things that we talked. It was, of course, the Nordic noir. That I think the new talents are playing with it. They're taking it on a different level. Another thing, of course, was the Viking things that became big. But right now, what we also discussed yesterday, all the folk horror films or like a elevated genre, whatever you call it, that, for instance, it started with Let the Right One In, then you had Border, like to name a couple of hits. And right now we work on Lamp. And when you also said about the actors, like we have Numi Rapace, who plays in Icelandic, and a lot of people think that it's a film in English because Numi is there. Because she made majority of her roles in English, being originally Swedish. But no one knew that she actually speaks Icelandic, that she grew up there. And this also helps, And I remember discussions, especially the American market. That we sold it to A24, which is a huge studio. But for them, it was a huge value that, it's the whole rooster of American, of Canadian talents that are getting very popular.
So when you're looking at sales, international sales, I mean, we tend to try to avoid that word brand, but you seem to be suggesting for lots of parts of the world, it is a brand. Scandinavia, the Nordics, is now something distinct. Is there a danger that it kind of gets stereotyped in there too, that there's an expectation that may be limiting of what Nordic means, or has it gone past that stage now where we want everything to be noir and closely lit, or is it a quality mark now?
And I think, I don't know, maybe it's from the distributor perspective, I don't think people buy anymore like, okay, it's a Nordic noir, it's going to work, because it got so many productions like this. So it used to start to be very selective because it became repetitive at some point. And I think, but there are new, it's different when I come from instance, from Poland. When you pitch a social drama from Poland, we know what it is. It's dark, it's some domestic violence, whatever. Like, it's the hardcore Eastern Europe. And you go to Romania, and, it's like 3 hours, dinner, Cristi Puiu, do the subtitles. You paid for the translator way more because the dialogues are 150 pages. And it's a slightly difference when you go to the buyer saying, like, I have... if you would pitch, for instance, like a Queen of Hearts set in another country, it would be a completely different film. There would be like, how no one would be expecting to play sort of like on a Verhoeven type of humor that it's a very troubling to watch. Because actually, like the guy is her stepson, but technically not. But it's like if I go to the buyer and say like, no, this is the film set in Serbia, and she's like a victim of a war and stuff. It's a completely... When you go with the Nordics, they know, like... And when they read, I mean, I think a lot of buyers will believe that it's actually accessible. That when... Of course, I don't say, like, people in Eastern Europe or Portugal or somewhere, they can't produce it, but I think it's longer, like, from our side. It's bigger work, like, actually to sell the bullshit that it's gonna work. In a way that with the Nordics, sometimes... it's slightly easier, and the exact example was for us, like we did Lamp, which is an insane film, but it's because of success of Border and Let the Right One In, a couple of others, people were like, we have an audience for this, and the audience is both theatrical and VOD, and, people, they also look what worked, like they, especially with the serious bigger companies, and which distributors are, I mean, you always, as a distributor, look at your market, your figures, your data, and, like, we know that some of these films, like, for instance, they don't work, like, in Asia, for instance, it's a slightly, completely different market, or in China, but they work, for instance, like, stuff like Lamp, and we know that they're going to work really well in South Korea and Japan, that have a huge history of genre films, but, for instance, there's no such history in other countries.
No, it's really interesting because what you're pointing to there is the idea that there's a kind of quality mark here, that there's an expectation that something which on paper looks difficult or not immediately accessible, if it comes from Poland, I might have a different expectation, even if exactly the same film has come from Denmark, and that is a very big deal when we're looking at international audiences. It takes a long time to get to that point where you feel that the confidence is there in giving things a go. But it does feel to me like that's not been exploited in a lazy way by a lot of the Nordic countries. It feels to me like that quality mark is something taken seriously, so it's not we're just going to do the same things over and over again. They're coming back to you with different kinds of content and different kinds of work.
I think what Peter also mentioned about the new talents, I remember, for instance, when I started the film history, and everyone was like so fed up with, for instance, with Bergman. And that was the moment when Ostlund arrived as a, new, interesting, and everyone, it was when one of the genre or director became academic or scholar, and you have to learn it, and you have an exams on Bergman trilogies, and you don't know which one is it already. And then you have the new wave, and the new talents, and this is the same what we've been discussing, that, for instance, I see also the big wave of Nordic comedies, which are, I'm for instance, a huge fan of really dumb French comedies, which has a brand, and they are dumb to the level that you really don't have to think at all. And but they are super successful in a lot of territories, and they keep on going. It's always Isabelle Huppert is always working there, and it's becoming the same in the Nordics. That with the I remember how Adam's Apple was a big film, and he started to do way crazy films these days, and people go and people recognize actors like Nicolas Bro in Poland. People this is the Nicolas Bro, and I think this is one of the few countries that people know who is actually Nicolas Bro. Of course we know all the Skarsgård and stuff, but it's, as we said about the actors, and it's the same with Numi because of Millennium and stuff that she's doing for streamers, for instance. We are, I think, piggybacking also what they do for the branding of being recognizable and actually to trust, that it's the same as with books and for instance. There was a big wave of these folk tales, and it works. And then you have, now we have the Northmen coming up, Roger Ebert movie that it's written by the same guy who written Lamb, and it's a movie of $100 million with an insane cast coming mainly from Scandinavia, and it's lifted to the level of 100 million. But then it's also when you look at disaster films from Norway, they're made for 5 million. And I wish we could see, when you look at the film Guilty, when you said about talent, for me, it's been always interesting. In Denmark, New Danish Screen became a brand for itself. And it's the same in Sweden, was a moving Sweden, this super low cost for here standards, in Poland, it's a proper debut budget. But there were 4 or 5 talents a year that broke through.
Yeah, it's interesting. We the brand, and I'll come to João and Hans about this as well, because I think the notion of the brand of Nordic is kind of difficult, but it's still got to be good. I mean, I think sometimes I watch occasional films from even places like Iceland, think British humour was meant to be the big thing, but actually there's a lot of irony. Comedies that travel are extremely rare, but there seems to be a comedic element, a kind of ironic thing that I thought was our culture, but we don't do that anymore. We've way past that stage. But I wonder if you recognise, Hans, that feeling of a brand mark now that's very firmly established, but has lots of diversity underneath that kind of brand of Nordic.
I totally agree. It is the way you position, especially again the books, the newest crime from Scandinavia, which is written on the cover. So people are using it as a selling point, but. On the other hand, for our, I told you we are launching Persona non grata in November. We will not launch it as a Danish movie, so it is not always because the movie itself is good.
Yeah.
It has already gone higher than the image you need. It is quality on its own. I think we are already in a stage that you don't need to position it always as a Nordic movie. It is a movie from Iceland, or it's a movie from Denmark. Like I also mentioned, okay, it's a movie from France or from the UK. It's like that. We don't need to emphasize anymore to it for us for film marketing. We will not emphasize that anymore. We don't need it. It's more the content and the story itself which we are selling and which must prove the success.
Yeah, so it might get you through the door in terms of confidence of quality, but you've still got to get to that next stage of it being really good. And I guess,
yeah.
I mean, João, maybe you could point that out. I mean, if something stops being good, that's the danger of it, of a brand of feeling like it's a Nordic film. Is there gets to a stage where you might think, yeah, they used to be really good a few years ago, but now, I'm not so sure. So you've got to survive. I think you're saying this, Hans. You've got to survive on its own terms. It's got to have that quality once it's through the door.
Yeah, but like a country like France, for example, I know in France they produce 250 movies a year, but what we get in the cinema are like 20 from those. So the rest is crap. It's not good enough to release. And I think I don't know how many movies are in total produced in the Nordics. Maybe 100 or 150. I name. Okay, you have seen how many is released in cinema. It's like 15 or 20.
Yeah.
So what we get is the best. That's what we are doing. That's what he is doing in Portugal. What I'm doing in the Netherlands. We are selecting the best movies. So the crap, which we see 9 out of 10, everybody knows in the audience, 9 out of 10 movies you see on the festival is not good enough to buy for a theatrical release. So we get the best of it.
Yeah.
So I am not afraid that the Nordic as a quality brand will diminish during the times. No, because
there'll always be a degree at the top. And is that your experience too, João?
Yes, I don't see a major risk on that. I think Nordic altogether, there are a new generation of new directors that are coming and are showing very good movies, new actors acting very good, and the storytelling is amazing. So, and this is illegal. I don't see any reason for that to be interrupted or stopped.
But that was your point, Peter, at the beginning of this, is that there are always new talents that are coming through. So what I think where you're getting to as distributors, what you need for the Nordic kind of mark to stay important is that the top layer of films. So I'd like to go to a crap Nordic Film Festival. If all the really bad ones, I think that would be a fun festival to go to. I'm sure you're doing terrible ones too. But as long as you have a layer of really good ones. But what you were saying at the beginning, which I think is very optimistic, is that there is this feeling that there is new talent coming through all the time. So that top 15 isn't reliant on 3 directors. Those top films might be, we could see some talent that we've never heard of in a couple of years becoming the next superstar. And I just wonder how they're going about making sure that happens. And is there now this feeling of a conveyor belt? There really is a way for great new talent and storytellers to reach the top.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not worried at all, and I'm also happy to hear that our distributors are not worried. I certainly think also not only the directors, but also it's almost insane how many talented script writers and producers which are coming out of the different schools. Right now we are lacking screenwriters, and they're being cherry-picked before they finish schools.
But what's different about, because that situation isn't true of lots of other countries. So what is it about the process? You mentioned earlier the idea that maybe things like short film have stopped being this kind of boringly academic calling card and have started becoming a genre that's effective in its own right.
Definitely, short films. We have a big tradition of short films in the Nordic region as well, and a lot of short films festivals in Denmark. I believe we have one of the oldest short films festivals in the world, and they have been. I think in the end, that's the core that the young people are being taken seriously, and they are being challenged as well, and being believed in.
No, I mean it is a nice idea that could work. I'm trying to. I'd like to inject some negativity in here because I'm English, and it just seems wrong to be being so cheerful for this amount of time. But there must be some challenges. I mean, one that seems obvious to me is that. The copying, you know, if I look at every drama out of the UK now, every noir-ish drama has to start with some really annoying song that over some dark bridge or aerial shot, really irritating. But people are copying. You know, you can copy, and at the end of it, the truth, as Hans was saying, is. There are only X amount of films that are going to get released in cinemas, and it's a competition. It's a zero-sum game. You've got to stay at the top. And I wonder, what are the dangers that would stop, from what you can see, the Nordics being still on that top table?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think that... the world keep changing, and so I'm not afraid that we are running out of good stories and themes. I mean, the past few years, there's been a lot of films coming out about sexuality and gender, and because that has been a hot topic in a few years, it's something else, and then in 30 years, it might be sexuality and gender again, but in a new way. I think we'll always have new stories to tell. I don't know, and I choose to believe also in the cinema. Still, I think that people will choose to watch the big films on the big screen. At least I truly hope so. I would, but of course it has been interesting to see, and it will be how the pandemic has affected the whole way of watching films, and have we lost some of our cinema audience to the streamers? Are people becoming more lazy and just watching it at home? And is it a problem? Are people still willing to pay some money to actually watch the new film before everybody else? Because in the end, it's also a matter of money and to keep the wheels going in the film business.
Yeah, I can see that, Hans.
Yeah, one of the dangerous thing is that the production funding, the nation funding from the Norwegian Film Fund and the Swedish Film Fund, that they stop, or they think, okay, we can withdraw, we can retreat our funding, and then you might get in a situation that it goes down because there's less funding. So productions have lesser budget to spend on setting, on casting, on whatever, and that can be a danger. Money. That the production is that big, that large, that it's spreading, that the film fund has to divide their money over 50 projects instead of 20. that can be in danger on the long term, that there is lesser budget to create a proper movie.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got a success story, sustaining it over the long term is difficult, and that money has to be managed very, very effectively to ensure that you keep that new talent coming through all the time. I've seen in Haugesund, they just build another oil rig by the look of it and just take it out. I don't know why all the oil is still in the Norwegian bit of the North Sea. I thought they couldn't just shift it over a little bit. We could do with a bit of that. But there is that feeling, I think, that that just having money is one thing. Money can go down, and maybe that's where your threat comes. That from a distributor's point of view, that the cinematic theatrical release is so still essential to the economics and also to the creative kind of work. I mean, that's an interesting one to take. Marcin, are you more positive? Oh, Hans, do you want to? Oh, Marcin.
No, I think it's also one of the biggest problems. Also, I see that the Nordics are only working within each other. Not only, but it's also the problem is like for us when we also set up a lot of co-productions and stuff. We could see that we can't really match a Norwegian production with smaller funds. Like even France is, if you don't have a TV there, it's not a competitive. Like they can't bring 5 or 10% of the budget of a debut film here, because it's very expensive countries and the budgets are way higher. And I think this is one of the dangers. And when we talk with a lot of like producers here who want to co-produce, there's a lot of markets and stuff, and it's fancy to do it, but they just realize like it doesn't match. Like it's becoming too difficult. And I think this is one of the dangers, that it's actually the market. I might tell it's a little bit spoiled in that sense. It's a first world problem. But I think it might have an impact on the creative side at some point, that it's becoming, and it's become, like for instance, I could see in the whole like Eastern Europe when the tax incentives started to be in place, like we started to lack crews for smaller films, and it's here like the more you start to produce and the more expensive, I mean there will be a challenge for smaller films, more challenging, lower budgets actually to get crews that they can afford, or like the level of crews that HODs that they want to. And I think this is also, I think it's very hard to make a film here for like €500,000.
Yeah, I mean, all the things that we're talking about here, I think, are the underlying economic issues. I mean, capacity is clearly an issue in terms of growth, in terms of funding for film, and this does eventually get through to distribution, because distribution at the end of it needs to ensure that there's a quality flow coming through. I presume there's also an issue there that other people were trying to up their game. It's not like the Nordics are operating in a vacuum, and waves do come through. I mean, we've had Romanian waves and Korean waves, and I still worry. We've everything we're saying here suggests that we've transcended the idea of a wave, that somehow the Nordic region is something which is more sustainable and better than that. But there are other places, and there is a danger of boredom and being excited by something else, and something coming out of Korea, for example.
And I think it's one of the examples, great examples about Nordics, is like you mentioned kids films, and I think at some point Nordics completely dominated the young adults festivals.
Yeah.
That I think Sweden or Norway won Generation so many times in Berlin. And right now, from my perspective, when I read a lot of stuff coming, I just stop to see differences between them. There are a few standouts, like Hearthstone was one of them, for instance, from Iceland, that there is, I think, and it's also the discussion that I had with some festivals, the coming of age stories out of the region, they become slightly similar, and it's very hard to find this one that would stand out, and especially when you look from the distributor perspective, actually they can release it in theaters, and this is, I think, I felt that, they might need that genre, or like that audience need a fresh wave, because it's really, I don't often see the difference of the project that got pitched to me 3 meetings before than now. To me, when you put it in the boxes of the market, because we don't communicate with the audience like the market, and when you do the benchmarks and stuff, you basically use the same, you do the copy-paste, and that's becoming really difficult because it works on the short term. It doesn't work on the long term. You know, that people.
No, and that's where the talent has to keep coming through, which is, I think, what Peter was alluding to. But you can become a victim of your own success. That suddenly it suddenly becomes, Nordic film stops being a brand, starts becoming a cliche. It becomes the same thing. I would argue that there was a period of Nordic noir TV series where there were just too many that felt kind of the same, which I think is your point. It eventually can just become.
It's like in the UK, you still have Ken Loach, you know? And it's
he keeps
same,
going,
same but different. You know?
He keeps going, but no one watches Ken Loach in the UK. You know, Ken Loach is a huge in France, much bigger in France than he is in the UK. But no, I understand that there's a classic of an auteur upon which a whole, you know, when we say what is British film these days, Ken Loach tends to be the one of the kind of main planks that you're putting all of it on, and yet he's very atypical of the stuff that's coming out of the UK. But again, you know, you could argue these are first world problems, but actually that is, I think what you're alluding to is a serious danger, that other people also want their waves. And I recall the Korean wave, you know, that whole old boy period where there was a real excitement around that. With the Hong Kong film for a while, there is that always at the back of everyone's head should be, someone else wants your crown. Anyway, I was also thinking one of the things that holds together is these with Scandinavian films. They're all ridiculously good looking as well. So I feel in being British, watching all these gorgeous, tall Nordics it just makes me feel, I don't know. It's all wrong, and I'm sure that has something to do with the appeal as well. And on that note, I'll open it up to our ridiculously good-looking audience, obviously. So, is anyone? I mean, I'm interested in your experience as well. If you've got points, particularly about where, those new voices might come through, or maybe you have a film here that you'd like to share some thoughts on. Anyone got any points they'd like to make? Can't believe shy Nordics. I'll write that down as that's going to be my next thing. No one's got anything at all. That's yes. Here we go. Can you grab a mic just so it'll? Oh, I'll have to repeat the question. So you tell me and I'll tell them.
I have a quote here. I was just thinking about Arti Film.
Yeah.
His influence, but it's maybe not that blockboxing box of this.
And are you Finnish?
Well, he's still going strong, and what influence do you think he has made for the Nordic films?
And are you from Finland yourself?
No.
Okay. I mean, it's a very good way of keeping the overall question going about Ota. So Kaurismäki was the big star for some time. Obviously, it's been around for many years. But where you have a dominant character like that who's clearly influenced a lot of people, it's interesting how that stuff goes through. So Hans, Kaurismäki.
Well, for me, he was the second wave I was telling about. He was in the 19s with the Dogma and the Last von Trier. He was from Scandinavia, the representative of the cinema in my country. But then he produced movies, and then he slightly faded away. He had lesser success with his films, and then the third wave started. So I think he is one of the layers of the current success. Definitely, he opened the doors for the rest of the Nordics to become popular.
Is there anything in the unique voice? Well, Kaurismäki, is there anything? Because that, in business terms, that's certainly true. That he opened up the market and opened up the idea, I think, of certainly Finnish film, but actually Nordic film more generally. He was certainly that wave. But is there anything in also in creative terms that you look at and think there's an influence that's carried on that as a distributor your audiences love?
Kaurismäki is one, but there are other ones. Roy Andersson, Thomas Vinterberg, Ruben Worsland, very good directors.
Do you feel now that, I mean, someone like Ruben Östlund, for example, has become huge. At what stage do they start being established as the talents that you can rely on over and over and again? And who's the new
Östlund with the Square?
Yeah,
for sure. His second movie was very good.
And do you see that auteur tradition carrying on though? Is there, so all the ones you name have been around for a while now. It's still producing good works, but what you want is to be able to talk about the next one and the next one. You want that to feel always a feeling there are pretenders as the superstar, the next superstar coming through. I guess Ruben Östlund's got a few more.
I think cinema goers in Portugal, when they saw a film that is directed for one of these Nordic directors, they see as a recognizable value, so they want to see it. And so far, the critics have been good, and they have been placed in very good festivals. I don't see any particularly threatened here.
And is the festival still critical from your point of view? So success at festivals, which we haven't talked about here really, but the festival success is enormously important to getting into that top tier.
Oscar from Academy, for instance, with Thomas Winterberg, with Drunk.
Yeah.
It was very good for him.
Yeah. I mean, I know in Poland there actually are. We were talking about Scandinavian festivals. There are whole festivals there. I mean, tell us a little about the festival scene and how important that might be to sustaining the Nordic wave.
I think it's in a lot of countries. In the US, there's also a big one in New York, and I think because there's so much films that there. And I know about myself, like when I was 12, 14, I was like a big Nordic geek that, when you go for music and you start to dig deeper and deeper and and I think this is like a big culture. And it's also like when you look at Cannes this year, there was like 6 or 7 films from the Nordics. And when you say, I think about Finland, we had Kaurismäki for many years, but now I think maybe the market is slightly faster than an audience. Like everyone is looking at Juho Kuusemäen, like what he's doing next. And the same in Denmark about like Ali Abbasi and a couple of other people who are, before their 40s or that they already made a name, like Juho with the second film being in the main competition in Cannes and sharing it. The award with Ashghar Farhadi, who's like the name in the industry. This is also like a very interesting shift, that I think. I remember I was talking with one of the programmers of one of the fall festivals, and I was like, "Well, you have the in the Nordic," and he was like, "Nothing. Like everything went to Cannes. Like we've got nothing left." In a sense, that there was so many in Cannes, which I don't think any other, even America, didn't have that representation across the sections, across the genres. It was really, I think that was the cherry on top, like this year in Cannes, and they all sold, they were all got an interest from distributors.
We're back to the relentless positivity, which is true that if you can both have the auteurs that are there at Cannes, but still feel that underneath that that distributors trust the brand, that they'll allow those new talents to get a chance. That seems to me a very sustainable system. But Peter, do you have a festival strategy? When you're looking at festivals, it seems to me that that managing festivals and getting to festivals and getting those films as a result of festivals is something that all of the countries in this region seem to be particularly good at.
Well, I think I know that we have a very strong collaborations with like here in the Nordics, all the film institutes here and the sales agents, and we collaborate with most festivals and have a long tradition also of having films at all the festivals. So I also think that when the big festivals they look for film, they do look to the Nordic region as one of the places where they know they can find something and would like to find something. Of course, they can't pick a film from each territory in the whole world, but But I definitely think that they are looking towards the Nordics because they know that we have some pearls, for each film we of course make a very specific strategy for the festivals, which is crucial for a lot of the films and the directors and what makes these directors break through.
Yeah, and presumably, Hans, that's where the festivals are still where you're seeing. I mean, do you recognise that Cannes now has become it certainly has a very strong Nordic feel to it when you're there?
Well, I think it's not. I don't know how they select, of course, but it's the quality they select. And I think by coincidence or on purpose, it is like six movies from the Nordics are in the festival selection. It's not their purpose to select Nordic movies. It is the quality what they select. And what I recognize in my country, there is one dedicated Nordic film festival in November in the north of the country, of course, and they select Nordic movies. But for the other ones, like in Rotterdam, it's not we want to have Nordic movies, we want to have good movies to show, and then apparently these are from the Nordics. And that's the way it goes, and that's the way it goes also in Cannes and in Berlin. It's not we need. In Göteborg festival, of course, they need to be from the Nordics. But in abroad, in our countries, it is more the quality what's driven, and it proves to be Nordic.
And that's no accident, I suspect. I think the film institutes and so on. I think there's a strong festival strategy, and I think Peter is talking about how young talent is coming through. It feels to me like there's some smart thinking about placement and where to get people into that to get that attention, and as you say, it just feels like it's ubiquitous, and that's probably the result of some pretty smart thinking somewhere. Anyone else got any points they'd like to? Yes, one on the front here.
Hi there. I'm wondering about. You said the appeal of Nordic films, at least in the Netherlands, is because there's similarities. But do you see an appeal in Nordic films as being exotic? Is there something, some qualities about, we have a wave of indigenous films and that sort of content. How do you feel about that?
I think, that is of course a choice for the consumer to buy a ticket because they want to be entertained. They want to see a different variety. They want to see a different scenery, and they want to have a theme which is interesting. So all these are the choices to go to a film. If you only want plain amusement, you go to a Hollywood production and you entertain yourself. But if you want to catch a message, but you also like to entertain yourself because of you have been on vacation in a country like in Norway or in Sweden, and so you want to have the same feeling, or you want to experience the Icelandic landscape because it is so different from our own landscape. So these are all reasons to buy a ticket for a movie, I think. And the strongest thing in the Nordics is that, the landscape, the scenery is completely different. The fjords from Norway are unique in Europe, and the little horses in Iceland are only there. So there are different, unique positions. That's why, for example, like for Italian movies, we like the sunshine, we like the Italian vacation, and we like this drama, this family drama. So every country has his unique positioning, where consumer, I feel like to entertain myself with this in this sphere. I think that is a driver to buy a ticket for that. And then you have, of course, I've heard of the movie, it's such a good one, it's a good laugh. Okay, you have the word of mouth, which is working. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to need to kind of wrap up. The exoticism, incidentally, it's not about the grand sweep of landscape sometimes. I thought Let the Right One In was exotic. It feels like there's only one light in the whole, for movies in the whole of Scandinavia for a while. But that closeness, that sense of place, I think has been essential. And we haven't really talked about that, but the places themselves, I think, are enormously important in the appeal of those films. So as you can see, I think I'm certainly a convicted Swedophile, Scandophile. I think there is something about the region which definitely, I think we've been hearing, seems to have some kind of appeal that's transcended. And it's gone past, I think it's gone past the wave idea. And I thought Hans made a very strong point that growing up, there was, I mean, it was, for me, it was things like Moomintroll, which were extremely scary Norwegian things. I think they're Norwegian, aren't they? Finnish. Oh, dear. See, what a terrible thing. Whatever it was scary as hell, that thing. There was nothing, no horror film made since then has had the same effect. And Pippi Longstockings, which I know is Swedish, I'm sure I've got that one right. But there is that feeling that then you got this wave, and that wave most definitely made a difference. And that wave wasn't just about films, it was also about TV series, it was about music, and it was about books. There was a feeling of culture, and I think the familiarity of that culture that João, I thought, put very well, that this is where VOD perhaps can come into its own in the most successful way, is beginning to introduce people and creating familiarity around things that might once have felt challenging. It feels to me there's also an understanding that's been built up on that, which is the industrial level and the training level and the development level of all of the Nordic countries, it seems to me, have reached quite an impressive point where festival strategy and where what is being commissioned, and most of all, I think, allowing diverse new talent to get their voice is important. And we've been hearing, I think, from all the distributors that there's a feeling of confidence that's come from that. And that confidence is reflected in buying strategy. There is a feeling of quality that has come out of the Nordic region. And you can trace that back, and you can say that, you could argue that maybe the Nordic regions where horror was invented, you look back at those ancient tales and all the rest of it. This isn't a great thing, but it feels like it's now managed to fit itself into so many cultures around Europe and around the world that it has the potential to sustain itself. And not just to act in waves, to allow those new ideas to come through. And distributors have got used to the idea that when they deal with Nordic countries, that there's a quality expectation. The danger is always, of course, that isn't met, and there's also a danger that you're still in competition with lots of other people who are going to try and get up to the level that perhaps you're at. But I think what we're leaving from here is right across from north to south and east to west of Europe, there is a very strong sense that Nordic films have a relationship with audiences that is unique and sustainable. And for now, that seems like a pretty exciting place to be and to leave this panel. So thanks to the panel. And thanks to you and to the festival. Thank you.